Hello and welcome to Waterblog UK. Today I'm going to do a little segment just based on building traces for pike fishing, zander fishing. I'm finding more and more these days that waters are stipulating in their rules that you use firstly barbless hooks, and in a lot of cases now just single hooks as opposed to trebles in your trace building. So I mean, these things are commercially available, but I always have a lot more faith in building my own traces. So what I'm going to do with you today is I'm just going to show you I'm going to show you some standard traces. The principles remain the same for these sort of traces as well, so if you want to use trebles you can, but I'm actually going to build a trace today with just some single hooks instead. So let's start off with wire. As you can imagine, lots of different companies making lots of different types of wire on the market. There's a few favourites that I have. I'll just show those to you very quickly. Firstly is this 40 strand ET wire. I really like this. This is a really supple, quite a thick wire, but really supple. Very good for treble fishing traces, so traces for large pike. It takes, also because it's slightly thicker, it takes the crimps themselves really well. They crimp down and really bed down nicely. You're not going to worry about any sort of crimp slip. So then you have some more specialist wires like titanium wire. This is really good for making traces for lure fishing. You've got to be a little bit careful with it. If you do any fly fishing for pike at all and you use it for traces for that, it actually doesn't take to sort of repetitive bending. You actually find it fractures quite easily, so that's a bit of a downside with that. Then you've got some older styles here. So the Carboflex, that's a basically coated wire, thicker, takes the actual crimps really well again, but I find it does kink quite a lot. So you're constantly straightening out traces with this because of the actual plastic cover. It tends to just keep the kink in. And then good old-fashioned 7-strand, Australian 7-strand. They were going £20. That's what I'm going to be using for some zander traces today. So I'm going to make up the trace today with you using some of this. Okay, so what I'll do is if I just get a length now. Different people like different length traces. Me, anything over a foot, anything over sort of 12 inches, let's say on average about 14-inch trace is absolutely perfect. When it comes to actually cutting trace wire, I tend to steer away. Don't use your best scissors. It will blunten the actual blades very quickly. So just roughly measuring that, just using the table here. If you're making up lots of traces rather, just have two little markers on the table so you can just quickly sort of pull it off the spool, marker it up and then cut. So I'm just going to cut that. Okay, now for hook selection. The hooks I'm going to use are just these size 2 Gamakatsu hooks. They're just like a round bended hooks. It doesn't matter too much so long as they are sharp. So have a look around. Don't be afraid to get a few, in the shop. Don't be afraid to get the hooks out of the packet. Just check the actual hook points. Everyone sort of talks about checking them on the nail. If you've got good eyes, you can just sort of check them. I tend to just use the ends of my fingers and just see how catchy they are. These aren't bad at all. They can, maybe after a couple of fish you can always sharpen them up again, just bring them back. They do actually have a little barb on them. That barb, I don't know if you can see that, but I will flatten that down obviously before I fish it. So we'll start by putting the first hook, the bottom hook if you will, on the actual trace itself. What I do, it's a bit of a sort of belt and braces approach. So I'll bend over the wire and just put a little loop in it, feed that through the eye itself with the hook, and then back on over. You see that? Like that. And what that does, you have to sort of feed it over a little bit, just sort of bring it up on itself a bit. What that does is it sort of creates what we call a lark head loop in the actual wire itself. Like that. Now, the beauty of that is that already you've got quite a strong union there, so when you put the crimp on, even if the crimp does slip a little bit, you've got that little safety element there that stops the hook from coming off on the strike, which is probably the most common time that the hook might come off. So I've got what's on there. Lovely. So what I'll do is I'll put that first crimp on now. I'll just find my crimps. Here, I think. So there we go. I like Drennan crimps. They take really well. I had no real problems with them. I quite like the fact they're a bit longer than some other crimps as well. So they take to the wire very well. Got one of those. Sometimes you do get the fraying of the actual wire there. If you ever get that, it's a devil to try and get the crimps over. So what I tend to do is just cut it off nice and neat. Maybe just lose a centimetre off the trace, which isn't the end of the world. Now, probably my best tip for crimping onto wire is buy some proper crimping pliers. You can buy sort of for 99p. You can buy some quite cheap crimping pliers off the market. So the yellow and black handle affairs. I've used them in the past, but they just don't do the job. You'll find that you'll crimp in several places with them, and ultimately the crimp will slip. So there we go. If I just show you, so these are Fox crimping pliers. I'm sure there are lots of other types available on the market, but do try and get some dedicated actual crimping pliers designed for fishing crimps as well. So you see it's got the two sizes there. I'm going to use the smaller one because this is quite a fine crimp. Just line it up in the middle, leave yourself about ½ centimetre between the hook and the crimp, and just gentle pressure. Just bring it down, you'll feel the actual crimp flattening, and just hold it and release. And sometimes you just have to feed it off. There you go. That's a perfect little crimp there. Put some pressure on it. Make sure that's not going to slip. No, that's not going anywhere, is it? Lovely, good. And the last thing to do is just to cut your wire, again short, again using some scissors there. Have an idea of what sort of baits you're going to fish on the session. I know I'm going to be using sort of 3 to 4 inch roach bait, so I don't want too much of a distance between the two hooks. Probably about 2.5 inches there or thereabouts. And I'm trying to line them up as well beforehand. It will just help with bait presentations. So first thing to do is to secure your hook in the position you want it. There it goes. And I'm just going to use a typical sort of whipping knot, really, so what you'd use for your carp fish. Piece of silicone just to slide over that piece of the trace. Just helps everything sit nice and neatly. These guys here are Predator treble hook sleeves, but obviously using the single hooks they work just as well with the single hooks. You just thread that over. There we go. Just sits nice and over there. Look there. Okay, last but not least, we have to put on a swivel on the end. Now don't forget to put your crimp on before you put your swivel on, just because you're spending your time faffing around trying to get your swivel looped over, and then you realise there's no crimp to put on it. There we go. It's the same again, just bending that over, so you've just got a little arrowhead, if you will. I'll grab just some standard size 8 swivels, nothing exciting. I think these ones are JRC than they. Last but not least, what we can do is we can just check that. Just hold my swivel on one end, just use my crimp pliers in the other, and just put some pressure on that. Yep, that's nice and sturdy. Do that now rather than on the bank, and that way you just know it isn't. You can just have 100% confidence in those crimp points. And that's a finished trace. Overall about, say, probably about 14 inches there. Lovely. Good. So fingers crossed I'll catch some nice pike or hopefully some zander on that particular rig. Hope you enjoyed that.